Okay, Tad, you can unmute your phone at this point. Tad is the CEO of PSS Consultants, where he works with a team of professionals to develop bioenergy projects. He has over 35 years experience in the field of bioenergy project development and natural resources management. He's a registered professional forester. With that, Tad, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great, Richard. Thank you for that. Hopefully everyone can hear me this morning. That is my smiling face up there in the left-hand corner. Nice work, Richard, setting this up. And by the way, thank you to NorCal SAF, UC Extension, and CAL FIRE for inviting me to present today. This is a subject matter I'm pretty comfortable with, and let's launch right into this. I've got a slide deck of about 20 slides this morning to talk about the overview of the California biomass power industry. So let's go to the presentation overview. This is just an outline of what we'll be presenting today. Unfortunately, that image to the right is pretty much the business as usual fate for much of the forest biomass that's being generated in California today. Of course, these biomass power plants, when they were originally developed, they were targeting that type of material along with other waste and byproducts of forest treatment, as well as agricultural byproducts and urban wood. But so this is the presentation overview. Let's go to the next slide. Biomass. I would like to set up what the definition is of biomass in the context of this presentation. In some parts of North America where we've conducted work, the term biomass can include things like municipal solid waste, biosolids, other waste products, and today the context really is cellulosic material generated as a byproduct of forest, ag, or urban activities. Of course, forest activities primarily fuels treatment and timber harvest, commercial timber harvest. Agricultural byproducts are typically walnut shell, almond shell, orchard prunings, orchard removals, olive pits, those kind of things. And then urban wood waste is traditionally just that, material that's generated in an urban environment, more metropolitan. Could be tree trimmings, could be pallet wood, could be clean demolition and construction wood. So that's the context for today's discussion as far as biomass. Also, the term feedstock will come up, as well as fuel. Those two terms are interchangeable. So we're on to the biomass power. These are some rules of thumb, just generally speaking, sort of set the context here. When we are discussing 1 megawatt of power, it's basically, as noted here, 1,000 kilowatts, which is about enough power on a per hour basis to sustain 750 to 1,000 homes. Biomass fuel in the state of California is primarily purchased on a bone-dry ton basis. There are a few power plants, just a couple we know of in California, that still do procure on a green ton basis, but most of the power plants sample each load of biomass fuel that comes in for moisture, adjusts for the bone-dry tonnage in that delivery, and then pay accordingly. So keep that in mind going forward if you're reaching out to try and move or to sell biomass to a local power plant. Typical from our experience of forest biomass recovered during fuels treatment activities is typically 10 to 14 bone-dry tons per acre. Again, that varies widely across the Sierra Nevada and the Coast Ranges, as well as the east side, but that's sort of a rule of thumb, 10 to 14, which is about 1 truckload per acre. Typical burn rate for these biomass power plants is 1 bone-dry ton per megawatt hour. That's sort of a convenient burn rate, if you will. So if you've got a 10 megawatt biopower facility in your neighborhood, it's going to be consuming about 10 bone-dry tons an hour, or approximately 1 truckload per hour. Being a base load facility, typically 24/7, they'll be using, in the case of this 10 megawatt biomass power facility, about do the math, about 24 truckloads a day for a 24/7 operation. The power sales agreements are basically tied to long-term power purchase agreements, and we'll be talking about that here in a minute, but just to be clear, the primary revenue stream for these facilities is power sales. Some of the facilities in California are cogeneration, in that not only are they generating electricity, but they're also generating process steam, i.e. the term cogeneration, so that process steam is also, in some cases, a revenue source. So this is an interesting slide, pretty key to the presentation today. It's just an overview of basically the history of the California biomass power sector. The forest products industry, to its credit, was an early adopter, primarily because of the relatively high volumes of sawdust and bark being generated within the forest products manufacturing facilities. For a long time, these were disposed of using TP burners, example what you see to the right there in that image. But with technology evolving over time and biomass boilers and steam cycle power generation evolving, the forest products industry evolved with that technology and installed cogeneration facilities, creating both power and steam for lumber drying. In 1978, consistent with some of the energy challenges the U.S. was facing, the federal legislatures passed the Public Utility Regulatory Policy Act, which basically required investor-owned utilities to procure power from renewable energy facilities that at a rate that incentivized them to develop projects. And the market response was pretty significant, especially in California, where the California legislature also had some investment tax credits and some renewable energy tax credits to help incentivize a market response, which equated to almost, a little over 50 new facilities came online, ultimately with a capacity of almost 800 megawatts of generation. So those facilities operated for a while, and then along came the deregulation of natural gas, which started to drive down power prices. On top of that, California attempted, albeit poorly, to deregulate the electrical power industry, and in doing so, some of the utilities started buying out power contracts from existing biomass power plants. With these 50-plus plants operating, and some of them being a little bit challenged on their feedstock or fuel, many of them took that opportunity to sell back basically their contracts to the utilities, some of them with cash incentives, frankly. So a number of contracts were bought out in the early to mid-90s. The California legislature continued to be very supportive of renewable power. In early 2000, 2002, we saw some of the first renewable portfolio standard mandates coming through the legislature. And with that, ultimately, we're now at 33% renewable power. Basically, that 33% standard is basically applies to the large investor-owned utilities, PG&E, Southern California Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric, but it also applies to some of the other electrical service providers, like some of the the municipal utility districts like SMUD, as well as community choice aggregators. Today, there are 26 operating biomass power plants with an approximate capacity of 550 megawatts. And some of the latest policies, though, that we're seeing within the state is really a focus on smaller scale facilities, and that would be Senate Bill 1122, which passed in September of 2012, signed into law then by the governor. And we'll be talking about that some more here in a couple minutes. So one of the primary ratepayer benefits and societal benefits of biomass power is the fact that it is 24/7. There are other renewable energy sources out there that are also 24/7, such as geothermal, biogas, and small hydro under 30 megawatts in scale is considered renewable in California. You can see that from this graphic. By the way, this graphic is provided by the California ISO, Independent Service Operator. What's interesting here, though, is when you look at this, you can see that solar and wind have a significant carve-out within the renewable portfolio. This is a 2013 slide, but just with the advances in solar and wind technologies, we're really seeing a downward pressure on renewable power pricing, and with that, some real cost savings back to the ratepayers. The only challenge here, though, to note is you'll see that, of course, solar and wind are intermittent resources, and that does make it somewhat of a challenge for the utilities to try and dispatch power when, on demand when solar is not available or wind is not available. So we've seen the development of natural gas combined cycle facilities to be available as rolling reserves to dispatch when, again, the solar resource is not there or the wind resource. The other driver that keeps biomass power in the forefront as far as the U.S. here goes, we've got 29 states now with renewable portfolio standard policies, and you can see that from this slide, a map showing which states are active in that space. And this is basically a map out of the Desire USA website. You can see the link there. Great resource, by the way, for information on renewable portfolio standards. Okay, of the 26 operating plants in California, let's talk about them just a little bit here. Most are scaled in the 20 to 50 megawatt range, which is pretty significant. We would consider that to be commercial scale facilities, and all of them are operating 24/7. You might ask, why are biomass power plants required to operate 24/7? It's really part of it's the technology, because this is steam cycle and there's thermal, there's high heat involved here. Cycling these plants on a daily basis, shutting them down in the evening when there is not peak demand for power, really is hard on the metallurgy of these facilities. And so there's a real preference amongst the power plant owners, the biomass power plant owners, to operate on a 24/7 basis. In California, the feedstocks are, as we noted earlier, urban, ag, and forest. The definite low price leader is urban wood waste, and part of that has to do with the fact that the state has mandated that the counties divert significantly away from landfills in order to basically extend landfill life. And in doing so, the easiest thing to do for many of these transfer stations and landfills is to sort wood waste, chip it up, and send it to power plants. The next bullet here, power purchase agreements. This is pretty key. Many of the 26 plants that make up the existing fleet of operating facilities came online in the mid to late 80s, and they came online with 25 to 30-year power purchase agreements. Many of these are terming out by 2020, and I would venture to say that we may lose half of our capacity in the state by 2020 if things continue and those power purchase agreements are not extended. Currently, there's about 10 idle plants that have shut down either because their PPA was not extended or they were working on an interim power pricing amendment that was not extended by the utilities. So there's about 10 idle plants. The most recent addition to the fleet of plants operating in California is DTE Stockton, 45 meg unit there at the Port of Stockton, and it was previously a coal-fired facility that was basically torn down and the site converted from coal to wood. And there's one facility that we're aware of right now that at a commercial scale that's in the construction phase, soon to be completed by Sierra Pacific Industries there at Anderson, 31 megawatt facility. Let's talk about the technology here just for a minute. The primary technology utilized by these 26 facilities, in fact, the only technology is combustion, basically combusting wood waste as a fuel to create steam, and with that high pressure steam, spin a turbine and create power. I like this schematic, this Energy Products of Idaho schematic showing a nice silhouette basically of the facility. This right here is basically the firebox where through the metering bin, wood waste is entered into the firebox, and this is where water is made in steam. Everything from here over, though, interestingly enough, is all about air emission mitigation, air emissions control, and so you can see that a significant portion of the biomass power plants in California, at least, of the facility itself is dedicated to air emission reduction. Here's just an image of a 31 meg unit there at Bernie. This is Bernie Forest Products and their Bernie Forest Power facility. You can see off to the right, all of this is about air emissions. And then this green building in the middle is the turbine generator building, and off to and the boiler house is also enclosed in this green building here. The other technology that we're seeing evolve is gasification, and this really lends itself well to the smaller scale distributed generation facilities that are being considered consistent with Senate Bill 1122, which we'll talk about some more in a minute. There are basically two different types of gasification units. One is updraft on the left there. An example of an updraft gasification facility is something, there's a vendor, Nextera, based out of British Columbia. They've perfected the updraft technology, and they're deploying a couple of units in the UK right now, and they have a facility in British Columbia. Off to the right is the downdraft technology, where we've got facilities, a couple of the facilities in California, sort of the pilot projects are both downdraft gasification, and their technology is deployed by Ancor is the technology vendor based out of India, and Phoenix Energy has been the project developer on those two gasification facilities. The ultimate aim of gasification, of course, is to take woody biomass, introduce it into a high heat, low oxygen environment, crack those biomass molecules basically into a producer gas that's cleaned up and then used as a syngas into an internal combustion engine. Think of a Caterpillar 3516 engine that is close coupled with a generator set, and then you've got an idea what's going on here. It's all about creating clean syngas for an internal combustion engine, and that's the example. Here is a 50 kW unit example that Community Power has deployed working with Dixon Ridge Walnut Farm. I believe the primary feedstock in this case is walnut shell, and it deploys a downdraft gasifier to create the syngas to drive a small engine. This is an image of the Phoenix Energy facility. It's just a 500 kW or half a megawatt facility located at Merced. Traditionally, Phoenix has been using feedstocks such as orchard material, orchard prunings, orchard removals that have been chipped up, as well as some clean urban wood, and that's what's being used here in this rather tall gasification unit. Everything behind that unit here is about syngas cleanup, and you can't see it, but the Caterpillar 3516 engine's over here to the left, where the syngas is headed. Let's talk about Senate Bill 1122. As I noted earlier, this was signed by the governor in September of 2012, and it's basically a carve-out for a bioenergy of about 250 megawatts for projects under 3 megawatts, designed to support distributed generation across the state. The carve-out is based on feedstock categories. You can see there's 3 here. Urban feedstock facilities have a carve-out of 110 megawatts, dairy and other ag, 90 megawatts, and then forest source material, 50 megawatts. So if the forest sector responded by deploying 50 megawatts, for example, of distributed generation, that would be 15 to say 20 facilities across the state, ideally located in areas where forest fuels treatment is needed. And we're actually seeing that kind of market response today. There's about 10 facilities being considered by various communities across the state. The technologies deployed are traditionally gasification facilities, and they're designed basically to take in forest waste in the case of the forest source material. The SB 1122 is administered by the California Public Utilities Commission, who has been setting the guidelines here since the legislature passed this bill and the governor signed it into law. They've been working on the guidelines, which were issued December of last year. And with that issuance, then it's pretty clear that the feed-in tariff type auction that will come with that process will take place this July or August. And the terminology that the PUC has decided to use now is Biomass, that's a bioenergy market adjusting tariff. And the idea here is to have at least 3 projects in the auction queue bidding on a power purchase rate that is set initially by the Public Utilities Commission, but then over time would ramp up or ramp down based on the auction. So there's much more to that, of course, but in today's call, I just want to provide a quick overview on that. Here's an example of an SB 1122 compliant facility. The community of North Fork has come together with a project developer, Phoenix Energy, to create North Fork Community Power, and they're targeting basically a 1 to 2 megawatt facility at North Fork, California, looking at siting it on an old or an abandoned sawmill site, which basically is a great location. Retired sawmill sites traditionally are located in close to forested resources and have good transport systems. The other bullets here kind of list the parameters that the project's considering. At 1 megawatt, it's going to be a $5 to $6 million investment. It'll utilize about 1 bone dry ton per hour, because it's 1 megawatt, of course. They're going to be sourcing material from 30 to 40 miles. Delivered cost for bone dry ton is 45 to 60. And ultimately, our calculations show between 14 and 17 cents is the price point that will be required by this facility to have enough revenue to support the debt service, the feedstock costs, and also have room for profit and risk on top of that. So getting back to the commercial scale facilities here in California, the fleet of 26 plants that are currently operating, one reason that it's been so challenging to renegotiate the price point for these facilities is that they require between 10 and 14 cents a kilowatt hour when you consider the cost of feedstock to continue to operate. And with the relative price of natural gas and power today, that's going to be a hard price point to swallow for the utilities. Currently, short-run avoided cost is ranging between 3.5 cents and 4.5 cents kilowatt hour. Some that's not even close to the 10 to 14 cents that the existing fleet needs. So until we start to monetize the environmental attributes of these commercial scale facilities, it's going to be really tough to justify for the, as far as the investor and utilities go, a price point that's higher than short-run avoided cost. Hopefully at some point the monetization of societal and ratepayer benefits will actually take place. We know that Assembly Bill 590 with Assemblyman Brian Dawley as the primary author would carve out some of the cap and trade funds to start down that process to allocate value to the numerous societal benefits that the existing biomass fleet is providing, including those listed here in slide 17. Of course, fuels reduction, healthy forests and watersheds. Employment for many of the rural communities where these biomass plants are located, employment's a big deal. And so 4.9 jobs per megawatt is the average based on a study done in 1999 by Greg Morris. Of course, the other benefits are listed here regarding greenhouse gas reduction, reduce waste into the landfills, extending the useful life of the landfills, and then net improvement in air quality by diverting material that's traditionally piled and burned into a controlled combustion environment. And Bruce Springsteen will address that some more in his discussion. Of course, not all biomass users agree with the notion of societal and ratepayer benefits. Here's an example of a biomass user that falls into that category. We picked this up when we were doing some work in the state of Washington, and kind of interesting. So with that, we're going to close out this presentation. These are websites that we like that have everything ranging from maps showing the existing biomass power fleet to discussion of emerging policies, as well as just general database information on the different technologies that are out there. And with that, Richard, I think we have a wrap. If anyone would like to contact me offline, this is my contact information. Feel free to correspond or give me a call.
Thanks, Pat. Let's see if we have any questions. Mark Rosenberg from CAL FIRE is apparently typing something in. So we have you have another project that's emerging too. That's the Placer County one, right, Ted?
Right.
How's that one moving along?
Placer is attempting to site a 2-megawatt facility at Truckee, co-located with a transfer station known as Cabin Creek. And I believe Placer is still in negotiations with the utility group, and those are ongoing. What's interesting about that facility is it is not located in a service territory consistent with SB 1122, so it falls outside of the SB 1122 process. So they're pretty much on their own. They will not be participating in the auction.
Okay, Mark Rosenberg's got a question here about the lower heating value of wood compared to fossil fuels and indications that there are greater greenhouse gas emissions. Do you care to address that?
Right. So the heating value of wood is lower than some of the fossil fuels. We know that coal, for example, is 14,000 BTU per pound, depending on the type of coal. Where wood, you're looking 8,000 to 9,000 BTU per pound. So that is a delta. As far as greenhouse gas emissions, I know Bruce will be speaking here soon, and I think he can address that in a more detailed way. But when you look at the type of carbon that's being generated here from wood as opposed to fossil fuels, that does make pretty much a difference in how we calculate the carbon debt, if you will, of how biomass power generates greenhouse gas. So I'm going to leave that one for Bruce. He's much more attuned to the anthropogenic carbon versus the other types of carbon out there.
John would like you to say something about the biomass sustainability requirements.
Right. So the SB 1122 actually calls out within the language of the bill that material from sustainable forest management operations is going to be the primary feedstock for these forest category facilities. And along those lines, to CAL FIRE's credit, a series of workshops were held last year to sort of vet that process, and from that, a guideline of 16 key criteria was generated, and the PUC accepted that guideline. And so when applied in the context of forest management and the diversion of biomass to a SB 1122 facility, 12 of those criteria out of 16 need to be met. And it's a pretty straightforward checklist, basically. And if anybody's interested, I'd be happy to send that to you. With that in mind, the PUC intends to use that as a guideline, and the PUC is also ultimately required, and this is basically in their proposed decision, they'll be looking at third-party entities to provide oversight and guidance to make sure that at least 80% of the forest biomass coming into SB 1122 projects be sourced from sustainable operations.
A couple more questions. John Kessler's asking if there's a conversion rate for 1,000 board feet to bone-dry tons. Is there such a thing? You were just doing that this morning, right? Weren't you?
Well, actually, I was working with Mike on the conversion of cubic feet to green tons, and you know, if that is a tough conversion. I mean, generally speaking, if you figure that there's 4,000 bone-dry tons, 4,000 board feet on a load of logs, that equates to about, say, 24 green tons, and you want to convert that 4,000 board feet to bone-dry tons, you would take, let's see, 4,000 board feet divided by 24 tons, so we've got, no, that's not going to work. You know what, John? Email me and we'll work through that. But that's not a,
yeah, let's do that.
Not a common conversion.
Yeah, let's do that one offline. Yeah. Okay, so a quick one here. Wilson's asking, can an operator operate more than one facility under SB 1122? I suppose they can, right? They can. It's just as part of the auction process, there's what's called seller concentration, in that the first three projects up to start the auction, each one has to have its own distinct and separate ownership, so that you can't have shared ownership across several projects in the auction process. Again, that's known as seller concentration. So each one of the proponents or auction participants need to be separate ownerships. Okay, one more question, and then we'll have to turn it over to Bruce. Kim's asking, can AB 590 will provide a transportation subsidy for wood to facilities. Is this the best way to account for societal benefits? Do you know anything about that?
You know, I haven't tracked 590. It was my understanding that, generally speaking, it was to divert some of the cap and trade funds to help offset the cost of operations of the biomass plants. And I am not conversant